Hello witches, and welcome back to Activist Witch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they, and in this video we're gonna do a year update on my work with Vesta. I've done a video last year about her myths and lore and how I started to work with her, and it's kinda doing update mainly for the things that have happened in this year in my work with her, the things that I have learned, and then we're gonna also do an Altar Tour updated, and then I'm gonna give you some tips if you're fascinated by Vesta, Hestia, but you don't quite know how to start. And honestly, first advice is super simple, but we're gonna go into detail in it. But before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a Ko-fi, which is an alternative to Patreon that takes less from creators. And on there you can do a one-off donation, a monthly donation, or even get a tarot reading with me Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And for the foreseeable future, my profits from tarot readings will go directly to Cuccias to Gaza, who are part of the mutual aid groups who support Palestinian people evacuate and relocate to Egypt. So if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much. Also, don't forget, we are in phase 2 of Witches for Palestine. Check out the links down in the description below if you want to donate prizes or if you'd like to join the raffle itself. If you've seen my latest Q&A, I actually did mention about, I don't think that my deity videos require an update. No, they do. And if in the first video there's all the myths and lore and how I consider things, books about them, and you can find it still there, I'll link it actually down in the description below. I'm gonna talk more about my own evolutionary relationship with Vesta and what I've come to understand in the last year. She is still, first and foremost, my patron deity, the first deity that I've worked with officially since witchcraft. I started to work with Vesta just before moving to this house, and this house is beyond blessed because of that. Something that just came to my attention recently is actually the fact that in this house, which we've almost been for 2 years now, Raven and I don't have a spot where I go when I am sad or when we had an argument, Raven and I. Not that we necessarily had arguments that often before, but it was in every house that we had before. I genuinely could feel the moment that I would sit in that space, this is the position that I get, that I take when I'm upset, when we're having an argument. So usually it would be, am I sitting here because we're having an argument, or am I sitting here because I'm upset and we're about to have an argument? That kind of thing. I don't have that kind of spot in this house. And I realized that because I've had a weird realization moment a few weeks ago. And with the help of Raven, I worked through my emotions. I tried to understand why am I feeling physically upset, and that was due to issues with Italy and with my mother. And so I sat down and had a long, big, ugly cry, which was also coincidentally around the time when the US election result came in. So the two things combined, I needed a huge, ugly cry. And when I did it, I sat somewhere else. There's another sofa in this room, so I sat there and I realized this looks new. I'm not used to be here. And through that I realized if this is then the place where I would go to be upset, and I haven't sat here ever before, have we not had arguments here before? And looking back, I realized, I think the last argument that Raven and I had was 10 days after we moved. And then I tend to believe that because the house is so much safer, it's a proper cornerstone of our life, we got it in a very lucky way. Again, watch the first video about Vesta to hear the story of that. But it's a combination of factors that clearly makes us safer and comfortable, which is what I asked of her in a house, and I still thank her every day for. And I just thought, having that kind of cornerstone, then we have done work ourselves, on our relationship, on ourselves. And not to take away from the work that we have indeed done, but when I said it to Raven, even Raven said it's likely that the first 10 days, it's because we brought a bit of the energy of the old house, but then we started properly here. And indeed, again, if you watch the first video on Vesta, you will find on the 11th day that we were in this house, I lit for the first time the tea lights, the candles that I light for her daily, because on the 11th day we had unpacked and I was like, you know what, I think that even if this wasn't the house that I asked you for, this is better, and I think our deal stands. The deal that we made was through a spell to secure a property, which was another one, but this is better on every aspect, so I genuinely believe. And that's kind of the theme of this video, by the way, that she did what's best for me. She made happen what's best for me, regardless of what I thought I wanted in the moment, which is how good things happen. I mentioned it in the other video, I have daily rituals that I do with her. The main one is lighting her a tea light, because it's literally part of the bargain that we had. You find me a house that is safe and comfortable, and for every day that I am in that house, I will light you a candle. And that still stands, and it will never stop, if you ask me. And when there are times that actually we are away or on holiday, when I come back, I still light up enough tea candles for covering the days that we were away. I also got in the habit of lighting her daily incense with lavender, which is one of the aromatics that are sacred to her. And something interesting that happened this summer was this. One of my weekly rituals with her is reading tarot and trying to communicate with her through tarot. Once we go into the altar tour, I'll show you the deck and everything, but usually I try to do that on a Sunday, which is the day that is considered corresponded to her. But this summer a lot of things happened, and I think at some point I realized, looking in my tarot journal, that I hadn't done a reading with her in 2.5 months. And I noticed because one day the incense starts to not burn anymore. And it goes on for like a week. Every day that I do the incense stops halfway through. The reason why I do the incense along with the tea lights is that it's literally to cover any possible things that I lacked. And when I light the incense, I literally go, I say it in Italian because I don't know, it's probably the language that I'm used to do liturgies in. But I say it in Italian and I literally go by and say, if in any way I lacked of respect or made mistakes, I beseech you to accept this offering to try and make up for it. So the incense tries to be the free-for-all. Yeah, clearly she was saying, no, this is not making up for it. So I reflected, I looked at the journal and I realized, aha, we actually haven't spoken in a couple of months because I haven't picked up the deck on Sundays in a couple of months. And by all means, a lot was going on, but it's something so simple, and a lot of what happened this summer, along with being unwell with COVID and being busy, was also some sort of intense disassociation where I just would try to get away from life. It's really bizarre, and it took time to get back into the mindset of not only doing things, but why do I do this? And so there's definitely a point to, besides the fact that I do things daily with her and for her, my mind and my heart wasn't in it. And so just lighting her candles for just lighting up candles' sake. No, I think I've realized that it's much more important, rather than going through the motions, to actually take a moment to do things mindfully for her and with her. Which is why the moment that I started to realize that, it also became easier to go back to tarot. It didn't stand out as a chore, something that I have to do every Sunday. It actually came back to make me understand this is actually how she speaks to you. And considering that I'm not necessarily blessed with other manners of communications and speaking, that is very valuable. And the fact that it could just go in a list of sort of chores that I did, I think that's what she might have been most, not necessarily upset, because I don't perceive the energy of Vesta to ever necessarily go in that direction, but more make me notice. And then I think at some point the incense also fell in a very, very peculiar way. If I've taken a picture, I'll put a picture here. And that really felt like her trying to get my attention. And after I gave her attention, I made this reflection, I was like, okay, so things need to be done mindfully, not just because for the sake of doing them. And that helped, and I think it was very interesting to, you hear about people's relationship with their deities. I personally can't think of people that I've ever spoken about actually the relationship that I had with these deities sort of fell off track a bit. So I think maybe it's important to share, just because you can now know, it can happen and there are ways to simply get back in track. I think the day that I realized that, I literally made a reading with her, and it doesn't matter the day of the week that it was at that point, even if I can be a bit strict due to my autism. Now, as I know, we do it now because I realized it now. And I did this reading, and I think the positions that I chose were okay, what did I lack? What's the issue? What were actually my errors? How can I remedy that? But also in the third column, I allowed myself to go, but what did I do good? Did I do some good? Because I've been made notice before by signs here and there, and also by Raven, that observes what I do every day, that I can be very self-fustigating in this kind of things. I can be holding myself to a standard that is really high, that is very likely not the standard of the deity, but it's the standard of my brain, which is, again, autistic a bit. So it's that kind of thing. It's finding that balance between, okay, this is worth doing and understanding, and so try and do things more mindfully, versus we do things in a certain order and we tick it off the list. And I think what had happened for me is that my autism is very good at make me structure and ritualize things, but I went too much into the ritualization, and so I just started to do things because I needed to do them rather than to understand why I was doing them. So getting back on track with that helped. Something that happened recently, and it's probably the reason why I wanted to actually make this video, is this. So since I started to practice 2 years ago, that happened because a lot of things suddenly came into my life that weren't positive. Suddenly, everything started because Wiska passed away very suddenly, and I have this belief, genuinely, that a house in general, not just a witch's house, but a house, is safer from bad and negative stuff when there are cats in. I don't know if it's then connected probably to, what is felt around Bastet, which personally I syncretize to Vesta, or I see them as very close by. But something that I keep seeing in hindsight is how safe our life was for as long as Wiska was there. And the moment that Wiska passed away, a lot of stuff started to go wrong, severely wrong. We had a brush with homelessness, and I started to have all the legal issues that are related to Italy. And all at once, along with the grief of the loss of Wiska. I don't think that we had a worse time in our life together, myself and Raven, than in those few months between the passing of Wiska and then moving to this house. We solved some problems and some kept dragging, but still, once you are safe and comfortable in a house, that's the cornerstone, and then you build, and then you're able to hopefully solve the rest of the problems. So something interesting that happened since is that the trouble that I have with Italy is related to my mother, and it's related to the house of my grandparents. Because it's house, because it's family, I started to ask Vesta for help, deluding myself into thinking that I knew what was best, and so I asked specifically for something to her. And that's what the second candle used to be about. It was asking her to help me with Italy. But I have a very specific idea of how I wanted that help to be, which wasn't understanding of the whole situation at all. For 2 years, I've asked her help with Italy. I think about 6 months ago, I started to change the wording of what I was asking, which was basically, give me something to celebrate about. Because something that I've noticed, and I think I'll do a specific video about that actually, is how much easier magic works when you are not as specific about the result. You are specific about the emotion that that result brings you, but not about the concrete ways in which that manifests. So slowly but certainly, in the last couple of years, I've started to move from asking her something very, very specific about Italy to just give me something that will let me celebrate. Give me something that, as much as I thought I knew what would make me celebrate, things weren't going in that direction and actually kept going in opposite direction and worse. And genuinely, at some point, I attributed it to the fact that my mother is a nasty piece of work. It's just what it is. I actually recently had a chat with Carly Latham. They have the podcast called What Lies Buried. And it was literally just me talking about the trouble with my mother and discovering that she's a narcissistic person, like with narcissistic personality disorder diagnosed. So actually, when it will be out, I'll put a link to that here. But that's basically what I thought. Like, my mother has the ability to create so many problems for people that it's just what she's doing. Not that she's more powerful than a god, but she has a lot of ability to create trouble in the material world. That's something that has always been her thing. And that's been going on until last week. Actually, I had a few friends that lent an ear and their virtual shoulder for me to cry on. And after I spoke about that, I think the Saturday or Sunday after, I had a moment where I was just sitting at the altar and this thing sparked in my brain, which I don't know, it never sparked before, and it's the kind of thing that makes me wonder, is that how she communicates? Because suddenly, despite the fact that I had all the information in front of me and in my brain for 2 years, two things suddenly connected and made me realize it is actually for the best for your life now that your mother makes all the fuss that she wants, disowns you legally, but then you're free. And not that freedom wasn't valuable before, by all means, but there was a lot of internal conflict about the legacy of my grandparents, which also is something interesting because, as you can tell, my ancestor altar is just on top of Vesta's altar, and I have a deck that I work with my ancestors with. And in recent time, like in the last month, during Samhain season, I did a reading with them. And something that kept coming up was the coupling of the Ten of Pentacles and the Devil, which should have made me realize it was their way to say, do not hurt yourself in the effort to try and save our legacy. Because then realistically, when I look at it, this is their legacy, I am their legacy. But because, I've said it before, my grandparents were farmers, I've always had this thing about, can I let my mother destroy everything that they did? And it's a very materialistic way to think of things, but it is the way that I was raised. It's the way that they raised me, because again, being farmers, the idea of the land, the idea of owning the walls that you live in was very important. They also lived at a time where that was possible, but not necessarily now, especially for someone who's a millennial. But it was definitely something that I didn't have an easy time letting go of and understanding how, because things have changed, probably the kind of support that they give me, it's actually in part a way to live that kind of materialistic thinking behind, which is exactly what ruined my mother. My mother is a hoarder, and I always envision her as the reversed Queen of Pentacles, when what is supposed to be care becomes obsession, becomes manipulation, becomes a suffocation, and becomes indeed hoarding. And the fact that that realization came to me while I was doing the candles in the morning, and suddenly it's literally like, you're preparing all the lines of the Tetris, and then suddenly one of the long bits fall in and all the lines go. And I can't believe that I never connected those things before. And it made me realize what's happening now, all the legal shit that your mother is doing now, it's actually for the best. She does that, and your life here is kept safe, because your life here at that point has no connection to hers whatsoever. She can make a fuss, she can shout, Italy can be agreeing with her, because unsurprisingly Italy has always done that, because there's a lot of bias in countries like that when the surname of someone like me is Arabic, but that's fine. I knew that going to fight her in court, because she's trying to drag me to court. I knew that going there to fight her would have had no point, because even if I didn't do anything wrong, I've seen before how judges treat me the moment that they read my name. I'm not even joking about that. It happened before. A couple of years ago, I had to be there to actually help my mother in court. And the judge shushed me like I was a 3-year-old. So I know the kind of instinct that people in positions of power in Italy have towards me. So I knew that everything was skewed. I still thought that I should have fought to defend what my grandparents built. And then I started to receive like the Ten of Pentacles and the Devil, and still that did not quite make it register as much as that morning, lighting up the candles and realizing, if that goes away, all your life here is safe. Let it go. And since coming to that realization, I genuinely feel like I have a newfound lease on life. I cannot describe it. It's so silly in a way because I had all this information before, but it never clicked until then. So there's definitely something about what you think is best for you does not necessarily have all the information about all the sides of the universe, past, present, and future, that actually makes you understand what's best for you really practically. Which I think is why we are told to consider the feeling rather than the practical, rather than what do you need to obtain to have that feeling. Which I think is the reason why when we do money spells or prosperity spells, the point should never be the number in the bank or the vision of gold, but the feeling of safety and satisfaction and comfort of being economically safe. Those somewhat speak more to the universe and to magic than anything else. And I am only glad, thankful, that despite me not knowing what was best practically for me, what I asked of Vesta was always a reason to celebrate. Even if when it wasn't happening, I was getting disappointed. But because I managed to understand that that was what was worth asking for, then the realization came to me and I realized, oh, this is actually a reason to celebrate. I just wouldn't have seen it a year ago or 2 years ago. I actually had all the information. I don't know why I didn't see it. My bad. But that's what I mean. Like, I had no perception of what the bigger picture was, incredibly. But thankfully, she did. And things end up for the best. And that's actually a tendency that I have been lucky to see in my entire life so far. I don't necessarily know what's worth having in that moment. I will make very stupid requests, but thankfully it always ends up for the best. And something that I'm also by all means very thankful for is that I have the eyes at some point so that things click and I have the eyes to understand why that was for the best. So that's two things combined. So there is, I guess, an intrinsic point of fate. I might not know what's practically best for me. I trust that she does. And so far, so good. There's no reason of disappointment. That being said, why don't we take a look at the new and improved, not really, it's actually pretty much the same as last year, altar that I have for Vesta. So as you can tell, it's on a fireplace looking heater. The heater does not really get used much, but I never turn it off so that the flame is always going, so that it's sort of the equivalent or similar to the fact that the Vesta flame was perennial in Rome. And then when we extinguished it, because Theodosius thought that he knew best, within 20 years, Rome was ransacked and fell after a millennia. But that's fine. At the very back, like here, I have these tubes of glass with offerings that are basically herbs that are corresponded to her. There's yarrow, there's goldenrod, there's chasteberry, lavender. I don't remember the last one. And actually I got those from the deity kits of Vera's vessels, whom I also have Hestia candles from. Like, it was amazing for me to find out that actually there are other people that work with Vesta Hestia enough to actually have deity candles specifically for her. So I was really, really excited when I found it the first time. And usually I use these and I light them up and I try to just sit with it and meditate, which doesn't happen often because it's a very, very complicated way for me to communicate. But when I do, I use these. There are 2 columns of chrysoprase. Chrysoprase is specifically a stone that was sacred to Vesta specifically, not even Hestia, in Rome, which is the reason why it's the main crystal / stone that I have on her altar, and it's also the stone that it's on this pendant, which also being in the shape of a V, you can understand why called naturally to me. I got all of these on Etsy. Actually, if I find it again, I'll put the links down in the description below. I have this deck consecrated to her, which is the Soul Tarot, which is an indie deck. I was planning on consecrating to her the Lucid Dreaming, but it was so hard to get a copy of for a decent price. Then in the end, when I found this on Vinted, I snatched it up immediately. Soul means sun. She's associated with Sunday, with fire. It seemed appropriate. What I did to consecrate it was literally put it under her incense burner for 5 days, because I associate the number 5 with her, because the letter V in Roman numerals was the number 5. V for Vesta, there you go. I do readings with her, as I said, on Sundays. For a year, I put the readings in this journal, which has a space for deities. I have now come to the end of this, so I've consecrated a journal that will be specifically for her, and it's this one, because I associate the drawing of Zodiac by Alphonse Mucha with her, probably because of the fiery hair. But because of that, when I found this, I was like, yes, this is the next journal. I have indeed an incense burner. I found this in a local shop, and it has all pumpkins. Pumpkins, it's autumn, it's cozy, and I have small mushrooms actually at the bottom of the altar as well, just for decoration. So I do associate with her the feeling of coziness of autumn, so that's why I got the pumpkins, and I was like, I think it's for her. I have 2 small columns that sort of emulate the columns of Roman times. On one of them, I have an actual silver Roman coin from, I think, the late 200s. And on one side, there's indeed the symbol of Vesta with her name, V-E-S-T-A. And I found it for like 20 quid. It's one of the first things that I found, and it seemed appropriate. So I have an original Roman coin that says Vesta. On the other column, I have 2 fire opals. Fire opals are so expensive. I got these on Etsy a couple of years ago. I'll find the link and put it down in the description below. But if not, like, don't worry. It's super expensive to be a stone this small. They're very pretty and they're fire, therefore I put it to her. But yeah, careful there. I have 2 selenite bowls. The smaller one just has tumble stones of chrysoprase. I actually can't find the other one. I had 2. The other one is a palm stone, and I had it with me during my autism assessment, which helped immensely with the fidgeting. I don't know where I put it after that. I'm really a bit worried, actually. I hope that I can find it again soon. This bit of chrysoprase I actually got in Glastonbury, though. In the other selenite bowl, I keep the jewelry that is consecrated to her. So I have a chrysoprase ring. Unfortunately, the chrysoprase ring that you see in the first video, I lost, which is still something that I haven't got over with. I have another pendant. It's also sort in the shape of a V, but I don't use it. I actually don't think I've ever used it, but I really liked it because it's also art deco. And I have this, which is a copper pendant with chrysoprase and amethyst. And Raven got it for me last year because last anniversary was our copper anniversary. This is one of the best working pendulums with Raven that I've ever seen. The kind of communication that we got with this, never before, never again. I'm not good with pendulums, they don't quite talk with me. They do talk through Raven, and this one has been loud and clear, and the way that it literally changed sides from saying no to say yes as soon as we make a question was creepy to watch. Beautiful though. No, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. Immediately. I have the statue itself of Hestia, which I found in a Greek store on eBay. If I find it again, I'll put the link down in the description below. And it rests on a coaster that actually was a housewarming gift from a friend. So it seemed nice to bring that auspicious kind of thing under the statue of Vesta, who is the patron of the house, to keep us warm, comfortable, and safe here. And then I have the 2 tea light holders. I think these are a year old. So before, the candle was simply outside on the altar, the tea light. I found these, I don't remember if Vinted or eBay, but it's a brand called Pastimes, which doesn't exist anymore, but used to do a lot of Art Nouveau stuff. And I do associate the color gold with Vesta. So when I found this too, I was like, I feel like this works for her. So now I put the candles in the tea light holders. Down here, I don't know if you can see it, but I have a small cauldron, which is just a decoration for Halloween. And inside I keep the tea lights that I use daily with her. And on the sides of the hearth, I have the herbs that I leave there to dry. This is a bundle of mugwort that I gathered myself. And there's some rosemary there that I just like got at Lidl. I have fairy lights in the background because I just, I don't know, we got here and I thought instead of going on the curtains, I feel they should go there. And they stayed there. I got 2 more actually tea lights holders because they are golden as well. I found them at TK Maxx. I think these are Diwali decorations actually. I don't use them often, but I like that they fit the space there. And I have again a couple of mushrooms because autumn coziness, it speaks of Vesta to me. And then on the side, you can't quite see it, but all the yarn that I use for crochet is there. I feel like crocheting, taking care of the house. When I do the dishes, I always consider it a devotional to her because I'm keeping this space cozy and tidy and nice. Not only because it's consecrated to her, but also because she protects it for me. So the exchange that I do is to put it in its best shape. Now, on to how to start working with her. I personally started by necessity. People will tell you, no, don't work with deities until you are well proficient. And I am sure that it's valid and I'm sure that you should think about it. There are other deities that I've taught to work with, but until I have space and time to research them and to dedicate that time, I'm not going near. So that is definitely the classic thing that you hear and that I always advise. Because when you start to research a deity, and the more you research, the more you get interested, I feel that's already a sign in its own. If you start to research and it feels a bit like a chore and there's a lot of things, maybe it's the opposite. That's at least the feeling that I had, because I know that for Vesta and Venus, the level of research and deep diving, reading, even as hard as reading is for me because I'm dyslexic, it was something I couldn't get enough. The physical books that I have on Hestia and Vesta, that I actually went through and I was excited to try and find more, that's an unusual feeling for me. So that might be a thing. And honestly, I think, who's the Roman? It's not Virgilio, but there's a Roman writer that literally talks about Ovid, the Fasti of Ovid, has a part specifically on Vestalia and on Vesta as the deity that they were worshipping at the time. And Ovid has a point of Vesta is in the flame. So I liked to find a statue to do all these. It's also ecstatic. I also built it over 2 years. But you don't need any of this. You need a tea light. And I think a pack of 100 tea lights at Lidl is £4. And 100 tea lights, in my case, would be 100 days. If you do it daily, you don't have to do it daily. I don't necessarily recommend people do this daily because it's a commitment. So it's very nice when people dedicate a day of the week to a deity, because that is incredibly more doable already. When I did the bargain and I asked for a safe and comfortable house, and I said, you find it for me, and I will light you a candle for every day that I'm in the house, I made a commitment. And you know what? It's for something super important, because without the house, that is the cornerstone of life, nothing else comes. So it is a huge commitment, but it's one that I am very glad to do, to have gotten this place. But if you get into it, maybe do reflect on that. Is it something that you have the energy to do every day, even if it's just finding a candle and lighting it up? Is it better to do it weekly? Is it better to do it monthly? The point is not how often you do something, is how consistent you can be. Is you're basically making a promise and you just need to live up to that. So The idea is always under-promise and over-deliver, in my experience. Which in my case is, yes, I said a candle for every day that I'm in that house, but then even when I'm not in the house, when I come back, I lit enough candles to make up for the other days. Under-promise, over-deliver. In my experience, best thing you can do. But at least, if you fall behind, if you don't have the energy, hey, Spoonie Witch here, you have not overpromised and then you feel bad because you, A, worry that the date is going to be mad at you. I don't think that that's a thing that happens that often. They have a different perspective on what's important in life, but still, I understand that the way that we think of them will make us feel like we haven't lived up to it, and we can become, it's an Eight of Swords situation, if it delivers. We put ourselves in that mind cage, so careful of not over-promising for your own standard. I think whatever form of divination works for you, dedicate something to start talking to her. And I think you can start talk to her well before you have established, like, oh, now we're doing this, now I work with you. Do divination to see what she thinks about it. In my case, again, it was a matter of condition, a situation that happened and I needed help, and what I thought of doing was striking that bargain. I hope that it doesn't necessarily happen that way with you, but that also means that you might have time to get closer to each other in a more patient and extended way. Never forget, goddess of the heart and fire, goddess of peace and patience as well. And honestly, any time that you do something in the house, call to her. Like, tell her, oh, you know what, I have to do this chore. I really don't like it, dishes for me. But you know what, I'm doing it for you, I'm dedicating it to you. And who doesn't like gifts, basically? Especially if you have to do it regardless, I genuinely think that if not so much something that gets to her, it's something that puts definitely me in a better mindset to do those things, to keep then my surroundings nice and tidy, exactly because I like the idea better if I'm doing it for her rather than doing it because I have to. And being the goddess of the house, we have to leave. We spend so much time in our houses, me especially, because, you know, being disabled, I'm in my house most of the time. But even if you have a 9-to-5 job and everything, the house is where you go back to recharge your batteries. The rest of the world is shut off, and this is your space. Even if it's not a house and if you still just live in a room in a house, that's still your safe space. And having the help of the kind of energy that Vesta brings to that, it's a gift. Again, I've lived in places and houses here just in the UK. I've been renting for 20 years this year, and I've been with Raven 10 years. This is the first house in the last 2 years that we don't have arguments in. Make of that what you will. If you have any questions, I love to talk about Vesta, so just leave them in the comments, please. Let's have a chat. Anything that I know it's for you to peruse. If I haven't thought about it, but I probably know, leave me a question. I'll be there to respond like that. And until the next video, I really hope that we can hex the patriarchy together, because there's need for it.